Today, we stick with the law because we need to hold this upper hand. We need to demonstrate very clearly we know the standing that was put down on the Supreme Court record. We need to demonstrate to these politicians that we know their game, and they need to be spoken to like they are public servants. You need to stop begging these people that are putting on a clown show in your parliament and wasting your time and continuing to install all of this legislation in the background that technically doesn't apply to you as a free people. These are money masters in your realm making decisions on your behalf because of your failure to communicate with your politicians. So I'm going to swap back and forwards again. We look at a letter that I sent to Senator Rennick, and we look at Senator Rennick's response. And then we look at a book called Thy Will Be Done by a man named Arthur Cresby, who shows you how to write to your politicians. I might not write in a fancy way, but we're past this point of them knowing who I am and what standing I present on the table. Now, I can be a bit of an ass sometimes and write some nasty things, but I'm generally to the point and reasonably blunt about certain matters. So I sent an email to Malcolm Roberts and Senator Rennick. We told you, we know it's a military operation. Now, this is evident from the command line responsibility that I have laid out in the last 10, 15 videos. It's very evident from all the evidence that has been put on the table. We point out the 74 pages of black that we pointed out in the last video, and the video of the Dutch, which is why it was brought up. This is a command line responsibility. They've been given names. They have a duty and an obligation to charge these people, and the evidences are widely available. You cannot excuse these people from the crimes they have committed. We will not go away. Now, you would expect some sort of response that would acknowledge that there are crimes taking place. But the very quick response that came back, why are you telling me? You think I don't know that? Tell it to the other politicians. Why am I telling you, Senator Rennick? Because you're a Queensland senator, and I'm currently travelling around Queensland. I think you represent those people around me at the moment. Therefore, I have a duty and an obligation that you are palming off as a senator, saying that it's not your problem, you're trying your hardest. Well, are you representing the people? Are you putting their voice forward? Are you charging these people with the crimes that have been pointed out to you very, very clearly? I don't think you are. So let's just stop this and I'll open up another document. I've got it there. So this is an interesting document here. It was written in 1958. Your Will Be Done by Arthur A. Cresby. Now, what's important here is Chapter 2. What is the legal function and duty of a parliamentarian? The parliamentarians that are putting on a massive clown show like Lydia, Faruqi, and more, all mocking the foundations of your Christian Commonwealth, all trying to undermine those foundations, all trying to create division, all trying to create racial arguments, all trying to create some sort of like Lydia, when they have a duty and an obligation in a line of authority that we will look at as well. So I'd like you all to realise that your will is what comes before the Parliament, and they're your public servants that are obligated by duty to uphold your will. So the most important part here is from the High Court case Horn versus Barber 1920. And this correlates around the same time as the engineers case, which told you about the fabric of it all in God, King and Country. When a man becomes a member of Parliament, he undertakes high public duties. Why weren't women in the Parliament? Because of the family estate that they divided you from into ward of state status. When a man becomes a member of Parliament, he undertakes high public duties. Do you consider those high public duties, Senator Rennick, Malcolm Roberts, Pauline Hanson? These duties are inseparable from the position. He cannot retain the honour and divest himself of the duties. One of the duties is that of watching on behalf of the general community the conduct of the executive, of criticising, and if necessary, of calling it to account in the constitutional way by censure from his place in Parliament. Censure which, if sufficiently supported, means removal from office. Now, we could go into the Oaths Act, especially in Queensland under the Oaths Act 1867, which demonstrates all of these people to be operating outside of office and therefore at law should be removed from office immediately. Removed from office immediately. That is the whole essence of responsible government, which is the keystone of our political system and is the main constitutional safeguard the community possesses, not the politicians. Now, since 1967, the community was pushed out of the process and the executive branch of government gave itself rise over the cabinet by merging Prime Minister and Cabinet together and giving the Federal Executive Council a higher role in the Constitution than it formerly had. The effective discharge of that duty is necessarily left to the member's conscience and the judgment of his electors. But the law will not sanction or support the creation of any position of Member of Parliament where his own personal interest may lead him to act prejudicially to the public interest by weakening, to say the least, his sense of obligation of due watchfulness, criticism, and censure of the administration. The above judicial decision on the duty and function of a Member of Parliament surely gives rise to the following legal question. In debating and voting on strict party lines in his House of the Parliament, is not a member of the dominant party in serious breach of the law and in contempt of the court? For how can a member obey strict party rules and High Court decisions at one and the same time? More simply put, these and other interpretations mean the sole legal function of a Member of Parliament is to freely advise the Queen in government of the country according to the clearly expressed will of the people on any matter or thing, i.e., his sole legal function is to legislate. In legislating, his sole legal duty is that, like a judge entering his court, he shall enter his house of the Parliament each official sitting day, and with judge-like dignity and decorum, he shall honestly, impartially, and searchingly examine all matters that properly may be placed before him, and with unbiased judgment vote according to his conscience and his sense of legal responsibilities. No member of Parliament has any legal function or duty outside of his House of Parliament unless that House officially details him otherwise. It is no legal part of his function or duty to interview ministers of the Crown or departmental officers for, on behalf of his electors or others. Such interviewing is purely a social and moral obligation that flows from his public status, obligations which can be and are performed by other non-parliamentary public figures without monetary rewards, either by salary or allowances. There is no constitutional legal authority for paying members out of Crown revenue for the performance of purely social responsibilities, whether that payment be a parliamentary salary and allowances or just allowances. State and federal parliamentary allowance acts notwithstanding. Of necessity, the following crucial questions must arise out of the aforestated judicial interpretations. Who or what is it that deliberately prevents backbench members of Parliament from faithfully carrying out their sole legal function and duty as judicially defined? If it is claimed that legal authority exists, then precisely what section of the Constitution's grant constitutional power to pay members of Parliament salaries out of Crown revenue for not faithfully carrying out their judicially defined legal function and legal duty? Where is the precise constitutional power to pay allowances out of Crown revenue to backbenchers of Parliament for the performance of judicially defined, purely social obligations of interviewing ministers of the Crown and departmental officers for and on behalf of constituents? For the legally minded, it is suggested that the ongoing would be extremely rough, if not impossible, to claim the implied and incidental powers of the constitutions as the authority for such payments. We could go on. You can find this book very, very easily by typing its title and PDF at the end, and you'll find a PDF version of this book, which then also informs you how to write to your ministers, and instead of acting like wards of state that whine at the nanny, you put them in their place and know that they are your servants. It is your will as the community as to what these servants do for you as your servants. They must serve God, King, and country. And that's very, very evident. So we need to look at something else, which I'll come to in a second. We can already demonstrate that in the last video with the list of names, the list of crimes, and the actual actions that are attributed to those crimes. We allow this to occur inside our Parliament. We allow actual criminals to gaslight us from inside our Parliament under our Constitution. We allow politicians to show allegiance to foreign interests and to serve foreign powers to sit in our Parliament under Section 44. That's a crime. And we allow this as Australians to occur under our Constitution. Under our Constitution, not those politicians who serve us as public servants, right? And they need to be put back in their place as servants to God, King and country, instead of you being the ones that grab the crumbs from underneath the table after the dogs of war have got to them first. And those dogs of war committed international war crimes in Afghanistan and other places around the world, in cahoots with partners that have been deemed to be war criminals in the International Criminal Court. Very easily demonstrated by your own criminal code that they're obligated to uphold the findings of the International Criminal Court at Section 8. We already discussed that in the last video. So, as we move forward, we need to impress on these politicians that they actually serve us, the people, and they're there to represent our voice, not their corporate interests, not their foreign interests, not their foreign obedience and allegiances. They are supposed to abide by the full spirit of the law in the Constitution, and they don't. They actually mock it every day inside that Parliament. We've seen Tony Abbott do it. We've seen John Howard do it. We've seen Turnbull do it. We've seen just about every Prime Minister do it, going back to Harold Holt when he disappeared in some sort of coup d'etat that was occurring that would allow them to finally oust Gough Whitlam from the only executive branch in the Constitution, therefore handing it over to foreign allegiances that Pauline Hanson clearly displayed her obedience to under Section 44 of the Constitution. I'm being very clear here in that you have allowed a clown show to occur when the crimes have been pointed out very, very specifically to you. And it's an obligation of the senators to hold each other to account, and they don't. They put on a clown show for you, like they did with the Afghani woman, like they did with Lydia. All of this is treason to the Constitution because it's all outside of Section 44 of that Constitution. And you've allowed this clown show to go on as senators, under oath to something. Shouldn't it come time now to define that oath? What it is, what it's for, how it ties into the international scope, why it brought about the Hague and Geneva Conventions, why you went outside of those rules of engagement that you were obligated to in Afghanistan. Instead of holding them to account, you put on a political show and shot everybody with LiDAR instead. You shot everyone with sound weapons while someone else put on a clown show instead of being held accountable for their actions on the ground in Afghanistan.
Police have confirmed they used 2 controversial sonic cannons on protesters at Parliament. While they claim the devices were used safely, they've been abandoned in some countries after seriously damaging people's hearing. Senior political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Protesters blocking their ears as the police trained a controversial sound cannon on them. 2 of the long-range acoustic devices, which have loud hailer or siren settings, were used on the day of the riot.
One of the problems with the LRAD is it's indiscriminate. So, if you have a truncheon or even a gun or pepper spray, you can aim it. But the LRAD, you can't really aim. you just blast it at a crowd.
To put things in perspective, the sound cannon the police used here at Parliament can reach 140 decibels. That's the equivalent of standing directly behind a jet engine. Anything over 120 decibels can cause permanent hearing damage.
The whole point of this deterrent tone is to target the vulnerabilities of the human hearing. Like, it's meant to hurt.
Very interesting that, right? That you never hold anybody inside that body accountable to the very rules of engagement that you were all obligated to play by. So now it's time to play by them. And we discussed that in the last video. So now we got to look at why a parliament does this. And it's called human trafficking. Okay? The police are the ones that human traffic you. The police are the ones that silence you. The police are the ones that protect the state who commits these crimes. The police are in cahoots with those that commit these crimes. That's very, very demonstrative by the command line authority that was set up during Scott Morrison's Prime Ministership, when they took away your emergency services and replaced them with first responders, frontline responders, putting you on a battlefield front line and allowing an alien invasion into your executive branch of government behind all of your backs until it could pop up in the background and go, "Hi, we're going to Nazi Germany you now. Off to your quarantine camps. We already created the biosecurity legislation back in 2013 that will give us the facilities, our detention centres, to lock you all down in a biosecurity scare, which is the new concentration camp. The new concentration camp is the failure to take the poison and therefore being deemed a biological threat to the forests, the fisheries, the agriculture and the mining, which comes under the usufruct under Hague and Geneva Conventions, wherein all of these players, including the woman that wore the Zionist scarf and showed her allegiance and obedience to a foreign power inside the Senate, are all linked to, are all linked at the hip to, under the thumb of, at the peril of their Zio-American allegiance lives, under Labour Code Article 26, which then became the Hague Conventions. So you need to look a little bit further as we investigate. So we need to now look before Christmas what you're going to rise to do in the new year with some sort of energy to do it, while these players commit these crimes in front of you and use their power and wealth to inflict suffering upon you, which is also a crime. We can already see very clearly the fracture in a line of authority into that constitution. We can already see through the Great Seal of the Commonwealth of Australia, smashed in 1973 and replaced with the Great Seal of Australia, that this is an administrating body that is obligated to rules of engagement that it agreed to operate under in The Hague and Geneva. We can see in the Criminal Code very clearly that that obligation is to the ICC. We can see that Israel has been accused by South Africa, backed up by other international bodies in that criminal court, and found guilty of an offence, okay, and a warrant for the arrest of issued, which would then make anybody else in cahoots with aiding and abetting what would be considered to be already genocide on a world stage. Genocide on a world stage being supported by people that aid and abet that genocide inside this Australian government. Very, very clear. Very, very open and demonstrated that there have been other parties, Tony Abbott and your Jesuit mates and your George Pell problem, right? That there's these parties that are not in line of authority to the Constitution in a bidding war to control that Constitution and enslave all of you in an act of human trafficking by putting blood, sweat on your backs, i.e. the state enforcing you to go to labour, sweat labour, not pregnancy labour, although the fruits of your loins are equal to the fruits of the forest or the fruits of the field to these people. They will use your children in their military, for instance, and then tell your children to serve the government of the day that turned on their parents. Okay? Very, very clear now that we demonstrate this for you and you can see it with your own eyes as this Christmas break turns on you. Things will happen in the background while you're celebrating with your families that will undermine your country, that will be carried out by the likes of people that wear foreign scarves into the Senate of your constitution, therefore demonstrating an allegiance or obedience to something outside of your constitution. We can look at that on a greater scale given the genocide that has occurred in that war game. In that war game. Now, when we look at the international slavery, we talk about the police issuing you fines and human trafficking you, farming you, literally farming your sweat so that they can get the maximum they can out of you, like squeezing the blood out of the stone of remembrance, squeezing the last of those bloodlines for everything they're worth, because that's what's going on inside this parliament. Why else would they want a republic year after year after year? Why else would they want to undermine what you are as a people year after year after year? Why would they come in and dismantle under administration and put you into $11 trillion debt? Why would Frydenberg say that he sold your children out to debt until 2080? You have to put these things into context as to what these politicians have done to you. And make no mistake here, it's not a mistake what they did. It's a military attack on you outside of those Hague and Geneva Conventions that they were obligated to follow at the peril of their own lives, i.e. the big war machine around them is what is supposed to hold them accountable, but instead chose to poison the entire planet. Poison the entire planet. That included President Trump, who organised and signed agreements in Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed. Star trekking across the universe, our Bible in our hands, our stone upon the ground. Star trekking in the rules of engagement that you went outside of, President Trump. In the rules of engagement you went outside of, Scott Morrison. We can see this in a grand context now for what it is. Really evil people manipulating the situation from corporate seats instead of the seats of God. We see this in the Senate, who do not adhere to the Constitution, their duties, their obligations, and their supposed oaths. And when we define those oaths, we come to the conclusion that they are foreign in line of authority to the Constitution and those forefathers that sealed that Constitution at law under the Great Seal of the Commonwealth of Australia. That could only make this an administrating power under specific rules of engagement that it itself has gone so far outside of that it now needs to be held to account. This would be akin to a Nuremberg trial in its extent worldwide, given that this administration, headed by the likes of President Trump and President Biden, has swayed prime ministers like Albanese and Scott Morrison and the many prime ministers before into disobeying the rules of engagement and the Constitution. And I've laid it out very specifically for you that these people have indeed, by name, committed heinous international criminal offences against a population, therefore deeming these things to be crimes against nature, crimes against humanity, international humanitarian law offences, treaty offences, demonstrating to the wider world that this Australian government fails to obey and adhere to the treaties and conventions that have been laid down on the table. This might be why the United Nations time and time and time again has warned the Australian government of its treaty breaches, while its dumb population just accepts being treated that way, even though it is a breach of international humanitarian law. Now, we must address the slavery that occurs in this country. If we do not address the slavery that is committed by all police forces in this country, then we will not look at our freedoms with God properly, because we allow a master to master us in their job as public servants. Okay? The Bill of Rights says very specifically, which is applicable in every state, that a fine is invalid until it has been heard by a court of justice. This might include a body of your peers called a jury. You have had your courts overrun with uniform civil procedure rules, and you have now come under a one world government. You have forgiven all of your rights into things like Fair Work Australia tribunals instead of appearing before justice in the judiciary arm of your constitution. You have allowed corporate interests to put you into tribunals that have been caught out in the past lying, especially in the Craig Thompson affair. We look back at a government that is manipulated by a foreign interest in the federal executive branch that has helped and enabled it to commit war crimes. Helped and enabled it to commit war crimes. So we take a little break just to say thank you for all of your help, and if you'd like to help out more, here's some bank account details. We've also got here some Bitcoin details. Now, Bitcoin had a little bit of a lift over the last month or so. Polygon and XRP, which also had a bit of a lift over the last month or so. So thank you very much for all of your support. As we look forward to 2025, you can see that we have put things on the table that are going to need a lot more support into the future. So as we come into Christmas, we must remember something. If we turn our Bible to Luke, we put a stone on the ground and we observe that solstice from our stone, we might begin a process here. We might actually start a process with God by observing this fact. This then might lead us to certain things in our sky story that would define our lineage in this constitution through that stone of remembrance in Melbourne, in the King's domain. Now, a stone can't be stood on twice. So the stone of destiny is not the stone of remembrance. And as we move forward, we start to look at this process. So on the 23rd of December, your solstice is going to come around and you're going to mark that on your horizon. Hor-I. Horus, horizontal, right? We're going to mark that placement from our stone on the solstice, the summer solstice, on a midsummer's day, as they say through all of the songs and movies and everything else that you've seen brain train you. So we observe that, and that becomes who we are. So we look at something else that we've been trying to set up properly. And I've been working on some websites to support a few things, and in time I'll show you a bit more. But right now, just point your attention to belltowerproject.com. A committee has already been organised, and Danielle has been kind enough to write up a small constitution, and we have opened up a bank account specifically and hold that money 100% for a project. No employment, no wages, no anything. 100% of the funds go towards the project. So we would like you to have a look. Might spark your interest to ring a bell and start to bring up your vibe for caring about what's going on a little bit more. So as we approach Christmas, think about the bells of Christmas and this summer solstice, and the reason we do these things all come back to who we are from a stone of remembrance, lest ye forget, ye, Y-E, you, because it harms you to forget. And in remembering, then we can hold these people to account because that's the truth in the matter, the absolute truth in the matter, put on the table, starting to be seen by the many in the beginning of Luke. So Luke is all about a few of us showing you, the many, the system that allowed you to become what you are in international law. International law. Against all these parties that hold you to your debts, the moneylender in the temple. So as we move forward, remember that it's summer solstice coming up, and we're going to do some work on our stone of remembrance and show it to all and sundry that we do know ourselves underneath what would be considered a mafia gang of war criminals at this point. A mafia gang of war criminals at this point. People that don't obey the rules that they themselves expect others to follow. A mafia. Okay, and that is what we've seen through Albanese's referendum. That's what we've seen through this division of race. That's what we've seen through this supporting of foreign allegiances and doing the bidding of foreign powers over and above the Constitution. That's where you start to see all of these things seep into those that took oath to foreign Great Seal of Australia, foreign to Letters Patent 1900, foreign to the Great Seal of the Commonwealth of Australia in use up until 1973. So we have to take these things into consideration when we look at the entities at play and stop falsely believing in the rhetoric that comes out of these liars and enablers and gaslighters like Pauline Hanson in our parliament as our public servants. They need to be put on notice, and it is all of you through Arthur Cresby's Thy Will Be Done that you will start that process. So Merry, Merry Christmas as you start to think about having the power demonstrated in the Engineers case 1920, united in a federal commonwealth over and above what are your servants that are in effect human trafficking you for your sweat labour so that they can keep silver spoons in their mouths on behalf of foreign interests that control the executive branches of this government, at which these ministers are supposed to hold to account but don't. So think about this as you come into the new year. You have the legal upper hand in this entire game, as has been demonstrated to all of you, to pick up that voice and stand united in a federal commonwealth. Stand united in the spirit and the fabric of that law in God, King and country, and know that these politicians serve a foreign power. Know that these politicians have foreign interests, and that all of them, including Lydia, including Pannion, including Roberts, including Rennick, including Pauline Hanson, have all taken oath outside of the lineage in that constitution, as can be demonstrated very clearly at law, putting them outside of their duty and their obligation at that law, meaning that they're obligated to rules of engagement that they now have to answer for being completely outside of.